At least my baby will have a father. The microphone feedback whined for a fraction of a second, carrying my sister Naya's voice across the vaulted ceiling of the Sun Valley Resort. She stood at the head table, framed by towering arrangements of white orchids, wearing a custom silk maternity gown that draped over her 5-month bump. Beside her stood Mike, her husband, swirling a glass of sparkling cider, offering the room a curated, camera-ready smirk. Naya pointed her manicured finger directly at me, sitting at a cramped table near the service doors. 150 guests turned in their chairs. Bankers, real estate developers, and local politicians looked at the single mother wearing a generic navy suit. Then they laughed. The sound rolled through the ballroom, a polite, wealthy chuckle endorsing the cruelty. My mother, Brenda, leaned into the microphone from the adjacent chair. "Some women just make bad choices," Brenda added, patting Naya on the shoulder. If you have ever sat in a room full of relatives while they treated your pain as a punchline, take a second to hit subscribe. Welcome to the Elena Vengeance channel. Drop your age and your city in the comments below, because I want to know where you are listening from. My name is Jasmine Cooper. I am 32 years old, raising an 8-year-old son in Idaho. And I did not cry when my family turned me into a public joke. My hands rested flat against the crisp white tablecloth. I felt the cold condensation beating on my water glass. I watched my sister soak in the validation. I watched my mother beam with pride over the golden child who married a supposedly wealthy tycoon. I was holding a leather briefcase beneath my chair containing the exact forensic bank logs proving Mike was bankrupting my mother to hide a secret life. I was calculating the precise moment to drop the evidence on the dance floor. I never got the chance. The chair beside me scraped sharply against the hardwood. My son Leo stood up. He did not ask for permission. He stepped onto the seat, elevating himself above the sea of seated guests. He wore a neat button-down shirt and a small striped tie. He looked directly at the head table, his dark eyes narrowing with a protective, fierce clarity that belonged to a much older man. Aunt Naya, Leo said, his young voice projecting through the sudden quiet of the room. "Should I tell everyone about Uncle Mike's other family?" The laughter vanished. The silence that swept over the ballroom possessed a physical weight pressing down on the guests. Naya lowered the microphone, her mouth falling open. Brenda froze her hand, hovering over a plate of catered appetizers. I shifted my gaze to the wealthy tycoon standing by the orchids. Mike dropped his crystal glass. It shattered against the floorboards, sending cider pooling around his expensive leather shoes. The smug arrogance drained from his features, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. Brenda lunged across the table, her chair tipping backward in a frantic bid to reach my son and silence him. But words once spoken into a quiet room cannot be retrieved. The pin was pulled. The guests held their collective breath, waiting for the explosion. To understand how an 8-year-old boy dismantled a real estate empire with a single question, we have to rewind 2 years to a quiet bank office in Boise. 2 years before the country club disaster, the air inside my Boise office smelled of ozone and stale break room coffee. I sat behind a dual monitor setup at a regional bank, tracing the invisible threads of stolen capital. As an anti-money laundering investigator, my daily routine involved dismantling shell companies, flagging suspicious wire transfers, and reading the financial shadows that white-collar criminals leave behind. The data never lies. It simply waits for someone willing to read the harsh truth hidden within the spreadsheet cells. To my family, this career was a punchline. My mother, Brenda, routinely dismissed my profession as a dreary clerical job suitable for a woman who lacked ambition. In her curated universe, status was defined by optics rather than substance. Naya, my younger sister, mastered the art of optics early on. She was the undisputed golden child, a woman who viewed the world as a stage constructed solely for her benefit. When Naya brought Mike home, Brenda treated the introduction like a royal coronation. Mike operated as a walking billboard for unearned confidence. He wore tailored suits that fit a fraction too tight and flashed a gold watch that ticked with the rigid cadence of a cheap replica, rather than the smooth sweep of a genuine Swiss timepiece. He spoke loudly at family dinners, dominating the conversation, with endless boasts about his commercial real estate development firm. He dropped buzzwords like synergistic growth and market capture, while swirling expensive wine paid for by my mother. I watched him closely. My professional training taught me to spot the subtle markers of a fraud. A man possessing true wealth rarely feels the constant, desperate need to convince a room full of relatives that he is rich. The underlying dysfunction ignited on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Brenda summoned me to her house, a pristine suburban property my late father worked 4 decades to pay off. The residence always smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive vanilla candles. I found Brenda sitting at the formal dining room table, a thick manila folder resting near her folded hands. She offered a tight, brittle smile that failed to reach her eyes. She poured a cup of herbal tea, pushing the porcelain saucer toward me. The gesture felt transactional, a calculated opening move in a high-stakes negotiation. "We need to discuss the future, Jasmine," she began, her tone adopting a hushed, conspiratorial quality. "Mike is finalizing the land acquisition for a premier luxury condominium project. It is going to elevate the entire family portfolio. He just needs a minor bridge of seed capital to clear the initial architectural zoning phases." I took a slow sip of the hot tea, letting the bitter chamomile settle on my tongue. I waited for the inevitable pivot. "Your father left behind that life insurance trust," Brenda continued, tapping her manicured fingernails against the edge of the folder. "Half of that principal belongs to you. It is just sitting in a low-yield index fund doing nothing. I want you to sign a release transferring your 50% share to Mike. He will guarantee a 20% return on your investment within 18 months. It keeps the wealth within the bloodline." The sheer audacity of the request echoed in the quiet dining room. She was demanding I forfeit the only financial safety net my father provided for my son in order to fund a man whose watch turned his wrist green. I set the teacup down. "I need to see the prospectus, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice level and professional. "If Mike wants me to act as an angel investor, I require audited financial statements. I need to review his past corporate tax returns, his current debt-to-income ratio, and the environmental impact studies for the proposed development site." Brenda stiffened. The manufactured warmth evaporated from her features, leaving a cold, rigid mask of genuine indignation. "You are asking for a background check on your own brother-in-law," she snapped, her voice rising sharply. "I am asking for standard due diligence," I corrected. "You cannot collateralize a child's future on a verbal promise over tea." Brenda stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She glared down at me, her eyes flashing with a familiar, toxic resentment. "You have always harbored a bitter, petty jealousy toward your sister Jasmine. You sit in your little cubicle, crunching numbers, and you cannot stand the fact that Naya found a visionary. You want to sabotage her happiness because you are miserable." I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my choices or justify my caution. Arguing with a narcissist is like trying to empty the ocean with a slotted spoon. I remained seated, absorbing the verbal assault with the practiced stoicism of a woman who spent 3 decades playing the scapegoat. "If you refuse to support this family," Brenda declared, her tone dropping into a dangerous, icy register, "then I will fund the visionary myself. I will liquidate my own retirement accounts. I will clear my stock portfolio to ensure Mike has exactly what he needs. But understand this, Jasmine. By walking away today, you are severing your ties to this legacy. You will receive nothing else from me. Consider yourself disinherited." The finality of the word hung in the air between us. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to beg for forgiveness, to reach across the mahogany table and sign away my father's legacy, just to secure a fleeting fraction of her affection. For a brief, agonizing second, the wounded child inside my chest wanted to surrender. It is a profound tragedy when a parent uses love as a weapon of compliance. But I looked at the manila folder and thought of Leo. My responsibility as a mother outweighed my desire to be a cherished daughter. I stood up, smoothed the front of my jacket, and walked out the front door without uttering another word. I drove back to my modest apartment, accepting the exile quietly. The subsequent weeks passed in a heavy silence. My phone did not ring. No invitations to Sunday dinners arrived in my inbox. They excised me from the family narrative, erasing my presence to protect the illusion of their newfound wealth. I focused on my son packing his school lunches, helping him with his math homework, and maintaining the quiet, peaceful rhythm of our independent life. The emotional cord connecting me to their approval severed cleanly. However, cutting emotional ties does not turn off an investigative brain. My mind is wired for risk assessment. I spend 8 hours a day identifying discrepancies. The interaction at the dining room table left a lingering metallic taste of suspicion in my mouth. Mike needed seed capital for an architectural zoning phase, but real estate development follows a very specific public timeline. Late that night, long after Leo fell asleep, I booted up my secure workstation in the corner of my living room. The blue light from the monitors cast long shadows across the walls. I opened the county clerk digital registry, bypassing the consumer-facing portals to access the raw property tax databases. I ran a targeted search using the legal name of Mike's development firm. It took several attempts navigating through a maze of shell registrations and dummy corporate fronts before I found a matching hit. The system returned a single parcel number located on the outskirts of the city limits. I pulled the digital deed and the associated municipal filings. In a legitimate luxury condo project, the public records should display a mountain of bureaucratic paperwork. There should be structural engineering permits approved, utility trenching plans, and commercial environmental clearances. There should be registered contractor bids and architectural retainers. I scrolled down the digital page, analyzing the metadata. The columns were entirely blank. Not a single permit had been filed. The zoning remained strictly classified as undeveloped agricultural brush. The math did not align with the narrative. He was extracting hundreds of thousands of dollars from my mother's retirement to fund a development that lacked basic municipal approval. My pulse quickened, a familiar cold clarity washing over my thoughts. A man who demands family money for an architectural phase while holding 0 approved blueprints is a man manufacturing a ghost. The next morning during my lunch break, I drove my car out to the coordinates listed on the county deed. The asphalt road eventually gave way to cracked, uneven pavement. I pulled onto a dusty shoulder and shifted the car into park. I looked out through the windshield expecting to see surveyor stakes, heavy earth-moving machinery, or at least a branded construction sign promising future luxury living. There was nothing. The premier luxury condominium project that cost me my inheritance and drained my mother's life savings was a barren stretch of dry weeds and broken fencing. It was an empty dirt lot baking under the midday sun. I sat in the driver's seat, listening to the engine idle, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. I possessed the initial thread of a staggering deception. Will Jasmine walk away and leave them to their ruin? Or will she dig deeper into the empty dirt lot? 6 months after my discovery of the barren acreage on the outskirts of the city, my life settled into a protective, insulated routine. 18 months ago, raising an 8-year-old boy solo required a specific, distinct kind of vigilance. I functioned as the sole provider, the primary caregiver, and the shield standing between my son and the chaotic dysfunction of my relatives. Single motherhood carries a quiet, heavy stigma in certain social circles. Predatory individuals often mistake the lack of a partner for an inherent weakness. They assume a woman standing alone is a target easily toppled. Mike operated under that exact delusion. It happened on a humid Thursday evening. The fading summer sun cast long golden shadows across my neighborhood. I had just parked my sedan in the driveway, balancing a paper bag of groceries on my hip, while Leo ran ahead to unlock the front door. The distinct crunch of tires rolling over gravel drew my attention. A sleek, imported SUV idled near the curb, blocking my exit path. The driver's side door swung open. Mike stepped onto the concrete, but the swaggering tycoon who charmed my mother was nowhere to be found. He looked like a man running out of oxygen. His tailored dress shirt clung to his torso, dark patches of sweat staining the expensive fabric beneath his arms. The confident, curated smirk had dissolved into a tight, frantic grimace. He paced toward me, closing the distance with hurried, erratic steps. He bypassed standard greetings entirely. He held a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy black clip, thrusting the papers toward my chest. "Sign this, Jasmine," he ordered, his voice lacking its usual booming resonance. It sounded thin and breathless. "I need your signature on the guarantor line right now." I did not reach for the documents. I shifted my weight, placing my body squarely between him and the pathway leading to my front door. "What are you talking about, Mike?" I asked, maintaining a neutral facial expression. "It is a bridge loan," he stammered, wiping a bead of perspiration from his forehead. $100,000. A minor liquidity float to clear a vendor dispute on the condo site. Your mother maxed out her available credit lines for the quarter. I need a secondary cosigner to satisfy the underwriters by tomorrow morning. You have a pristine credit score and a stable income. Just sign the paper." I looked at the trembling pages. "You want me to guarantee a 6-figure commercial note for an empty field?" I said, my tone flat and even. Mike flinched, his eyes darting toward the street and back to my face. "Do not play games with me," he hissed, stepping closer, invading my personal space. The scent of stale alcohol and sheer panic radiated from his skin. "If you do not sign this note, the entire project stalls. Naya will be ruined. Brenda will lose her investment, and if that happens, I will make sure your mother destroys you." He leaned in, lowering his voice into a calculated, vicious threat. "You think you are so safe playing the independent single mom? Brenda has enough money to hire the most ruthless family law attorneys in Idaho. If you let this project fail, she will petition the courts for full custody of Leo. She will claim you are unfit. She will bury you in legal fees until you cannot afford to feed him. Sign the paper or say goodbye to your kid." The threat was a masterclass in emotional extortion. He weaponized my deepest vulnerability. He assumed the mere mention of losing my child would shatter my logic and force compliance. A rich grandmother's legal challenge against a single working mother presents a terrifying legitimate threat in the American family court system. He expected me to cave under the sheer terror of that reality. But a predator always miscalculates the protective instinct of a mother. I did not shrink back. I felt a cold, sharp steel reinforce my spine. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes. "You have exactly 10 seconds to step off my property, Mike," I stated, measuring every syllable with lethal precision. "If you ever threaten my son again, I will not call my mother. I will call the police and file a trespassing injunction. Now get in your car and leave." He stared at me, processing the undeniable reality that his bluff had failed. His jaw clenched. He let out a harsh, frustrated breath, turning on his heel. He marched back to his vehicle, slamming the heavy door and speeding away, leaving a cloud of dust lingering in the humid air. He thought he left empty-handed. He was wrong. When he thrust the paperwork toward my chest, my eyes captured the bold printed text at the top of the foremost page. My brain, trained by years of anti-money laundering audits, took a photographic snapshot of the header. It was a formal lending agreement. Beneath the bank logo sat the exact legal designation of his primary corporate holding, Apex Horizon Development, LLC. I finally possessed the keystone required to unlock his hidden financial architecture. That night, after preparing dinner and reading Leo a bedtime story, I retreated to my home office. The house grew quiet, broken only by the rhythmic hum of my computer tower. I poured a glass of cold water, set it on the desk, and cracked my knuckles. I opened the encrypted portal utilized by AML investigators accessing premium financial databases unavailable to the general public. I typed Apex Horizon Development LLC into the query bar and initiated the search. The screen populated with a staggering volume of fiscal data. I bypassed the superficial tax filings and dove straight into the uniform commercial code liens and active credit registries. The numbers painted a portrait of a man standing on the edge of a sheer cliff. The commercial note he wanted me to co-sign was not a bridge loan. His primary accounts were already coded in pre-default status. The lending institution had flagged his portfolio for severe delinquency. He was entirely illiquid. But the true horror emerged when I audited his cash flow statements, tracing the origin and destination of his deposits. Mike was not developing real estate. He was operating a classic, localized Ponzi scheme. The ledgers revealed a chaotic cycle of incoming capital from new private investors being instantly routed out to pay the overdue interest yields of older, angry backers. He used my mother's retirement funds to pacify the initial group of investors, keeping the illusion alive just long enough to trap the next victim. The entire structure was a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse under its own unsustainable weight. I isolated the accounts payable column, applying a filtering algorithm to track outgoing disbursements. My eyes scanned the scrolling digits, looking for the erratic payments characteristic of a fraudster plugging leaks. Instead, my attention caught on a static, unmoving variable. Buried deep within the chaotic ledger amidst the frantic transfers and overdrawn notices sat a single recurring transaction. Every month, on the first day of the calendar cycle, an electronic transfer cleared his primary operating account. It was not routed to a construction vendor or an architectural firm. It flowed across state lines, disappearing into a Nevada shell entity. The amount never fluctuated. It was a highly specific, sterile figure. What is the highly specific recurring anomaly hiding in the Ponzi scheme's ledger? $6,005 every single month. No invoices generated, no vendor identification numbers attached, just a sterile numerical transfer crossing state lines into the Nevada desert. In the realm of corporate finance, uneven numbers reflect legitimate business expenses. Material costs, payroll deductions, and utility bills rarely land on a perfect zero. Round integers, executing on the exact first day of the calendar cycle, signal something entirely different. They scream personal liability. They hint at blackmail, alimony, or hush money. I sat in the dim light of my home office, staring at the illuminated monitor. The rest of the house was silent, save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of my son, sleeping in the next room. I traced the routing digits across the digital ledger, my professional instincts humming with a cold, sharp energy. Mike wrapped the destination account in a protective shell, utilizing a limited liability company registered in Clark County. Amateurs often assume an LLC provides impenetrable anonymity. Investigators know that every corporate shield requires a registered agent, a human being mandated to sign the foundational paperwork. I bypassed the standard consumer search engines and logged into a proprietary legal database. I pulled the articles of incorporation for the Nevada entity. The document loaded onto my screen, displaying the sterile, bureaucratic text. A single name rested on the digital signature line: Rachel. Uncovering a first name is merely opening the door. I needed the full architecture of her existence. I cross-referenced the corporate registration against Nevada property tax records and utility filings. My keyboard clattered softly in the quiet room. I located a modest residential townhouse in Henderson, matching her billing address. The puzzle pieces began to align, but the picture remained incomplete. A random woman receiving a high monthly stipend from my brother-in-law required a biological anchor. I pivoted to county vital statistics, querying the public health registries for Clark County. I entered Rachel's details, setting the parameters to search the past 5 years. The search algorithm churned through thousands of civic records. A moment later, the system returned a single hit: a certificate of live birth issued 36 months prior. I downloaded the scanned file. The stark, black text on the white background documented the arrival of a baby boy. I read the line identifying the mother: Rachel. I moved my eyes down to the adjacent field designated for the father: Michael. My breath caught in my throat. I read the date of birth again, ensuring my exhausted eyes were not deceiving me. The timeline snapped into a brutal, horrifying focus. The child was 3 years old. Mike did not just make a recent, fleeting mistake. He possessed an established breathing second family long before he ever stood at an altar in Idaho and recited vows to my sister. He was living a fractured, dual existence. The contrast between his two lives was dizzying. Back in Boise, Naya paraded through upscale boutiques and country club luncheons, wearing the unearned arrogance of a real estate tycoon's wife. She posted curated photos of her perfect marriage on social media, boasting about her flawless husband to anyone willing to listen. She treated her fabricated status as a weapon to demean my life as a single mother. Meanwhile, her golden husband was wiring a small fortune across the border to maintain his ghost life. But the true sickness of the situation lay in the origin of the capital. I traced the outbound $6,500 backward through his operating accounts. Mike lacked legitimate revenue. His empty dirt lot generated zero income. His Ponzi scheme barely gathered enough incoming cash to cover the interest owed to his angry, defrauded investors. The hush money required clean, untraceable liquidity. He was drawing the monthly Nevada payments directly from the seed capital my mother provided. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Brenda liquidated her hard-earned retirement portfolio, believing she was funding a luxury condominium empire that would cement the family legacy. Instead, Mike was using her life savings to pay court-ordered child support for a secret son. My mother was unwittingly financing the ultimate betrayal of her favorite daughter. The immediate, visceral reaction to such a staggering discovery is exposure. A lesser investigator would print the birth certificate drive straight to Brenda's pristine suburban estate and drop the paper onto her mahogany dining table. I pictured the look on Naya's face when she realized her flawless marriage was a mirage. I imagined the satisfaction of watching the golden pedestal crumble under the weight of undeniable proof. The urge to vindicate myself, to prove my warnings were justified, burned hot in my chest. Then the analytical side of my brain took control. Vengeance, executed in anger, is sloppy and highly unpredictable. Toxic family dynamics operate on a rigid, predictable set of rules. Narcissists reject any truth that threatens their curated reality. If I presented the evidence the next morning, they would not thank me for my vigilance. Brenda, incapable of admitting she was conned out of her retirement, would instinctively protect her own ego. She would accuse me of forging the civic documents. She would claim I hacked public servers just to ruin Naya's happiness out of spite. They would spin the narrative, framing me as the jealous, unstable sibling trying to poison a perfect union. Mike, alerted to the breach, would instantly scramble his assets. He would close the Nevada LLC, open a new offshore entity, and spin a masterful lie about a deranged ex-girlfriend attempting to extort him with falsified records. Naya would cling to his excuses, desperate to preserve her social standing. The truth would be buried beneath a mountain of gaslighting and denial. They would unite against the common enemy, me. Silence became my greatest strategic weapon. I closed the vital statistics portal. I downloaded the birth certificate, the offshore routing numbers, and the LLC registration documents, saving them to a secure, encrypted flash drive. I was no longer just an estranged daughter banished from Sunday dinners. I was the silent architect of their impending ruin. I decided to let them continue their performance. I would let Naya boast about her fictional wealth. I would let Brenda polish her empty legacy and judge my life choices. Every condescending remark they threw my way would simply add another line to my mental ledger. Over the next few weeks, I treated Mike's financial life like a forensic archaeology site. Every night, I brushed away the dirt, uncovering new layers of his deception. I cataloged every fraudulent wire transfer. I documented the names of the local investors he swindled in his localized scheme. I gathered every digital receipt, constructing an unassailable fortress of evidence. The data was locked, sealed, and ready for deployment. The trap was laid, but triggering it required a mechanism that shielded my identity. I could not be the one to light the match. Not yet. I needed to tighten the noose without leaving my fingerprints on the rope. I needed a mechanism that would force his financial collapse into the public eye, exposing the rot from the inside out. Jasmine has the secret, but how can she weaponize it without exposing herself? The math of a Ponzi scheme is brutal and unforgiving. It relies entirely on a constant accelerating influx of fresh capital to sustain the illusion of profitability. When the influx slows, the foundation begins to fracture. 10 months before the country club disaster, Mike's localized fraud reached its mathematical limit. He exhausted his pool of gullible local investors. The seed money my mother provided was gone, drained by the quiet, steady flow of hush money routed to Nevada. His primary corporate account flatlined, hitting a lethal zero. The immediate consequence of his insolvency manifested not in the private whisper networks of his defrauded backers, but in the sterile, automated systems of institutional finance. The regional bank holding the primary commercial mortgage on his supposed luxury condominium project ran out of patience. They issued the final grace period notices. Mike ignored them. He possessed no liquidity to satisfy the arrears. The lending institution, functioning on strict regulatory protocols, officially initiated foreclosure proceedings on the barren dirt lot. Banks despise carrying non-performing, toxic assets on their quarterly balance sheets. A foreclosed, empty field represents a bureaucratic nightmare, a frozen liability requiring costly legal maintenance. To purge their ledgers, financial institutions frequently bundle their distressed commercial paper and sell it on the open secondary market to private equity firms. They accept a severe loss, taking pennies on the dollar, simply to remove the toxic weight from their books. I monitored the regional banking liquidation schedules with the clinical detachment of a hawk circling a wounded field mouse. My professional credentials granted me access to the upcoming auction dockets. When Mike's $1.5 million commercial note appeared on the distressed asset registry, my pulse remained remarkably steady. The opportunity to tighten the noose had arrived. I did not require a dramatic confrontation. I merely needed to purchase the rope. Over the years, I built a quiet, substantial safety net. While my sister squandered her income on designer labels and status symbols, I lived modestly within my means. I funneled my bonuses and salary increases into diverse, low-yield index funds, strictly prioritizing stability over flash. I possessed the liquid capital necessary to execute a high-level maneuver. However, buying the debt under my own name would alert the family prematurely. I needed a corporate shield. I contacted a specialized attorney based on the East Coast. We filed the requisite paperwork to establish an anonymous limited liability company headquartered in Delaware, a state renowned for its strict corporate privacy laws. We named the entity Apex Holdings, LLC, a title so generic and uninteresting it would blend seamlessly into the background noise of any financial spreadsheet. On a crisp Tuesday morning while sitting at my kitchen island drinking black coffee, I authorized the wire transfer. My attorney, acting as the registered proxy, submitted the winning bid on the distressed auction market. By noon, the transaction cleared the escrow protocols. The regional bank officially transferred the assignment of the debt. The transaction was finalized. The legal reality shifted with terrifying, absolute finality. Through the impenetrable shield of my Delaware corporation, I officially owned Mike's mortgage. I held the exclusive rights to the commercial promissory note. I became my brother-in-law's landlord, the unseen entity dictating his survival. Acquiring the debt granted me far more than just the power to foreclose. In commercial lending, purchasing a note transfers the entirety of the original underwriting file to the new managing entity. The bank delivered the complete, unredacted loan application Mike submitted 2 years prior. It included the initial risk assessments, the appraisal reports, and the specific collateral agreements utilized to secure the massive injection of capital. That evening, I downloaded the digital loan file to my secure home terminal. I intended to review the documents, simply to understand how a reputable bank approved a 7-figure loan for an unqualified grifter possessing an empty field. I expected to find inflated revenue projections, or perhaps a falsified personal financial statement. I underestimated the sheer, reckless magnitude of his desperation. I scrolled past the standard bureaucratic disclosures, navigating toward the section detailing the pledged collateral. Commercial lenders require hard, tangible assets to back a $1.5 million risk. Mike's dirt lot held minimal value. He needed a heavyweight anchor to satisfy the underwriters. My eyes scanned the digitized ink on the screen. The text blurred for a fraction of a second. I blinked, forcing my vision to focus on the legal property description resting at the center of the collateral addendum. The document listed a sprawling 4-bedroom residential property situated on 3 acres of manicured suburban land. It detailed the custom stonework, the recent kitchen renovations, and the specific municipal parcel coordinates. It was my mother's estate. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The house my father worked his entire life to secure, the sanctuary Brenda prized above all other possessions, was explicitly listed as the primary guarantor asset. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the signature lines at the bottom of the page. To execute a cross-collateralization on a property owned outright, the title holder must provide sworn, notarized consent. Brenda never mentioned risking her home. She boasted about liquidating her retirement portfolio to fund the initial architectural phases, but she always viewed the physical estate as an untouchable crown jewel. She would never jeopardize the roof over her head. I enlarged the digital signature. The looping cursive spelling out Brenda's name looked smooth and practiced, but the foundational pressure, the subtle angles of the ink strokes, lacked her distinct, rigid cadence. It was a flawless, meticulous forgery. The catastrophic reality of the crime crystallized in the quiet room. Mike did not just swindle local investors. He did not merely drain my mother's cash reserves to fund a secret family. He committed staggering felony real estate fraud. He forged his mother-in-law's signature, secretly binding her fully paid-off estate to his fraudulent commercial note. My mother's home was legally tethered to a sinking ship. She slept soundly in her custom bed, entirely unaware that a single missed payment on a dirt lot miles away could trigger her eviction. The bomb was already armed and ticking beneath her floorboards, and the trigger rested securely in my hands. By purchasing the defaulted commercial note, I inherited the collateral rights. If I instructed my legal team to execute the final foreclosure protocols, the eviction notices would not just appear on a chain-link fence surrounding an empty field. The county sheriff would drive up Brenda's sweeping driveway and tape the legal demand directly to her pristine front door. My anonymous LLC possessed the unassailable legal authority to seize my mother's house. I sat back in my desk chair, the blue light of the monitors casting long shadows across my home office. The power dynamic shifted permanently in that quiet, isolated moment. They treated me as the disposable scapegoat, the boring sibling unworthy of their curated world. They constructed their fragile empire upon a foundation of arrogance and theft. They believed they were untouchable. They had no idea their invisible sister-in-law held the deed to their destruction. I literally owned the ground they walked on. I could pick up the phone right now, authorize the filings, and watch the entire facade crumble by Friday. The urge to end the charade, to force them to face the consequences of their actions, pulled at my logic. Jasmine literally owns her mother's house. When will she pull the trigger? Holding the detonator to a massive financial explosion requires a terrifying amount of discipline. The urge to press the button and watch the wreckage burn is a constant, heavy pressure against the back of your mind. But executing a controlled demolition requires precise timing. You cannot simply drop a bomb in the middle of a random Tuesday. You must wait for the targets to gather in a confined space where the blast radius yields maximum impact. You must wait for them to mistake their safety for invincibility. 4 months after I quietly purchased the distressed commercial note, Brenda summoned the family to the Oakwood Country Club. The venue boasted sprawling, manicured golf courses, heavy oak paneling, and a dining room that smelled faintly of expensive cigar smoke and roasted prime rib. I dressed in a simple, unadorned charcoal suit, ensuring my physical appearance remained as unremarkable as my fabricated status within the family. I left Leo at home with a trusted babysitter, preferring to shield him from the inevitable toxic theater. The dinner was supposedly convened to celebrate Brenda's recent appointment to a local charity board. However, within 10 minutes of taking our seats, the true purpose of the gathering emerged. Naya sat across from me wearing a crisp white linen blouse. She tapped a silver spoon against her crystal water glass, demanding the attention of the table. She placed a manicured hand flat against her lower abdomen, flashing a curated, radiant smile. Mike and I have an incredible announcement. Naya declared, her voice carrying the unmistakable lilt of a woman accustomed to applause. We are expecting a baby. Brenda shrieked with joy, knocking over her cloth napkin as she rushed around the table to embrace her golden daughter. Mike puffed out his chest, raising a glass of premium bourbon, returning the congratulatory nods from passing waiters. The performance was flawless. They projected the image of a thriving, wealthy dynasty expanding its footprint. I offered a polite, tight smile, murmuring standard congratulations. As the initial wave of excitement settled, the conversation predictably shifted toward a darker territory. Naya, emboldened by her impending motherhood, leaned across the table, her gaze locked onto mine, carrying a sharp, calculated cruelty. "We are just so relieved we can provide a stable environment for this child," Naya sighed, adopting a tone of profound manufactured sympathy. Raising a baby is an immense responsibility. Studies show they really need a traditional two-parent home to truly succeed. The emotional toll of a fractured household is just too much to gamble with. I honestly do not know how some women manage it alone without severely impacting the child's potential. She did not say my name. She did not explicitly mention Leo. She did not need to. The insult was perfectly engineered, slipping past the boundaries of polite society while delivering a direct, surgical strike to my core. Brenda nodded solemnly, taking a sip of her Pinot Noir, signaling her absolute agreement with the assessment. They were weaponizing my single motherhood, using my independence as a dark, contrasting backdrop to highlight the brilliant glow of their fictional perfection. I kept my hands resting quietly in my lap. I did not defend the beautiful, grounded life I built for my son. I did not scream that the traditional father sitting at the table was currently drowning in federal wire fraud. I allowed them to marinate in their toxic arrogance, adding another entry to the ledger. Midway through the main course, Mike abruptly stood up from the table. He patted his pockets, checking his phone screen with a frantic, jittery energy. He muttered an excuse about an urgent client call and scurried toward the heavy mahogany doors leading to the lobby. The sudden departure broke the rhythm of the meal. I waited exactly 2 minutes before excusing myself, citing a need to use the restroom. I navigated the carpeted hallway, moving silently past the cloakroom. I located Mike standing in a secluded alcove near the emergency exit. The swaggering, expectant father was gone. He pressed his cell phone tightly against his ear. His face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. He was speaking in a rapid, panicked whisper, the words spilling out like water from a cracked pipe. "I am telling you, Rachel, the liquidity is temporarily frozen," he hissed, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the device. "You cannot call the house line again." Naya almost picked up the extension. "I will wire the 6,500 next week." The architectural retainers hit a snag. "Just give me 5 days. If you file a default motion with the family court, the entire structure collapses." He was drowning. The Nevada mother, tired of the delays, was threatening to expose the hush money arrangement. The walls of his dual existence were closing in rapidly. I stepped out of the shadows, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Mike spun around, dropping the phone from his ear. His eyes widened, a raw, feral panic flashing across his features before hardening into a vicious, defensive glare. He shoved the device into his suit pocket, closing the distance between us in 2 aggressive strides. "How long have you been standing there?" he demanded, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "Long enough," I replied, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Mike stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of fear and expensive bourbon rolled off his skin. "You listen to me, Jasmine," he threatened, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "If you breathe a single word about my business calls to your sister, I will destroy you. I will convince Brenda to cut you out permanently. You keep your mouth shut and you stay out of my corporate affairs." He believed he was intimidating a helpless bystander. He assumed my silence equated to submission. I looked at the man who secretly forged my mother's signature binding her estate to a catastrophic loan, and I offered a slight, timid nod. "I will not say anything, Mike." He sneered, adjusting his jacket, before marching back toward the dining room, confident he successfully contained the breach. He failed to comprehend that I was not a threat to his timeline. I was the architect controlling it. I returned to my apartment later that evening, the heavy atmosphere of the country club lingering in my thoughts. The encounter in the hallway confirmed the accelerated decay of his finances. The execution required immediate preparation. I retreated to my home office, leaving the door slightly ajar. I booted up my encrypted terminal, opening the digital forensic binders. I spent hours organizing the offshore wire logs, the forged real estate documents, and the downloaded birth certificate linking Mike to the Nevada child. The sheer volume of data required meticulous sequencing. The exhaustion of managing a high-stakes investigation while raising a child solo eventually exacted a toll. Around 2 a.m, my vision blurred. I rested my head against the cool wood of the desk, intending to close my eyes for just 5 minutes. The rhythmic hum of the computer tower lulled me into a deep, heavy sleep. I did not hear the soft padding of bare feet on the hallway carpet. I did not register the gentle push of the office door. I woke with a violent jolt, the sudden sharp glare of the monitor searing my retinas. The digital clock in the corner of the screen read 3:15. I sat up quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing beside my desk, illuminated by the harsh blue light, was Leo. He clutched my tablet device in his small hands. He possessed a habit of wandering into my office during the night to play digital puzzles when a bad dream woke him. But he was not launching a game. The tablet was synced to my primary workstation utilizing a shared cloud drive. Leo stared intently at the glowing screen. Displayed in high-definition clarity was a photograph I downloaded during the initial background sweep of Rachel's social media profiles. It showed Mike wearing a casual polo shirt, holding a toddler, with striking familiar features. Beside the image rested the scanned PDF of the Nevada birth certificate. Mom Leo asked, his voice hushed and inquisitive, "Who is the boy with Uncle Mike?" The air vanished from my lungs. A cold spike of sheer panic drove itself straight through my chest. The carefully constructed firewall isolating my professional investigation from my personal life shattered in a single catastrophic instant. My 8-year-old son, an incredibly observant and fiercely loyal child, was holding the nuclear code. I moved slowly, fighting the instinct to snatch the device from his hands. I needed to de-escalate the situation without projecting panic. I knelt beside him, gently resting my hands over his small fingers, sliding the tablet away from his line of sight. "That is his other son, Leo," I whispered, maintaining a calm, steady cadence. "But it is a grown-up secret. We cannot talk about it right now, okay? It is very complicated." Leo looked at me, his dark eyes processing the information. He possessed an acute sense of right and wrong, a rigid internal compass that struggled to comprehend adult hypocrisy. He did not ask further questions. He simply nodded, handing me the device before letting me guide him back to his bedroom. I tucked the blankets around his shoulders, ensuring he fell back asleep before returning to the office. I sat in the dark, staring at the locked tablet. The parameters of the operation had fundamentally altered. I no longer possessed the luxury of waiting indefinitely for the perfect moment. The secret resided within the mind of an unpredictable variable. Can Jasmine control the timeline before Mike destroys the evidence or Leo accidentally spills the secret? 3 months before the country club disaster, the invisible machinery of institutional finance ground forward. I instructed my Delaware attorney to draft the formal notice of default. We dispatched the documents via certified overnight courier directly to Mike's corporate office address. When a developer receives a default notice from an out-of-state holding company, they typically rely on bureaucratic delay. Mike assumed Apex Holdings LLC was a faceless conglomerate buried in red tape. He calculated he possessed months, perhaps years, to untangle the mess before the East Coast lawyers figured out the specific coordinates of the collateral. He operated under the fatal delusion that he retained the upper hand. He failed to realize the managing director of the holding company lived 20 minutes away and knew his schedule intimately. The arrival of the certified letter triggered an immediate, desperate pivot. Mike knew the bank auctioned his debt, but seeing the new lien holder's demands in stark black and white shattered his remaining composure. He understood the cross-collateralization forged under my mother's name was now an active liability. If the new lien holder investigated the underwriting file, the forgery would surface, triggering federal felony charges. He needed to scrub the paper trail. He needed to convert the fraudulent signature into a legitimate, authorized transaction before the auditors arrived. To execute the cover-up, he required a localized theater production. On a crisp Sunday afternoon, Brenda sent a clipped, urgent text message demanding my presence at her Boise estate for a mandatory family meeting. I secured a trusted sitter for Leo, ensuring my son remained insulated from the impending crossfire. I drove across town, turning onto the familiar, sweeping driveway of my childhood home. Walking up the bluestone steps, I felt a strange, profound detachment. The pristine landscaping, the custom oak front doors, the slate roof overhead, none of it belonged to the woman waiting inside. By virtue of the defaulted commercial note resting in my secure digital vault, I was the unacknowledged owner of the premises. I crossed the threshold, entering a domain I legally controlled while preparing to be treated like an unwanted interloper. I found the family gathered around the grand mahogany dining table. Naya sat near the window, bathing in the natural light, sipping a cup of decaf coffee. She rested a hand on her growing stomach, projecting a serene, oblivious entitlement. Brenda occupied the head of the table, her posture rigid and attentive. Mike stood at the opposite end, functioning as the master of ceremonies. He wore a crisp linen shirt, but the collar looked tight, restricting his airflow. A thick stack of legal documents rested on the polished wood before him. "Thank you for joining us," Jasmine, Brenda stated, offering a curt nod that lacked any trace of maternal warmth. Mike has been working tirelessly with the estate planners to optimize our portfolios. We need to streamline the trust before the new fiscal quarter begins. Mike cleared his throat, adjusting his cuffs. He projected an aura of weary corporate responsibility, a man burdened by the heavy task of protecting his relatives' wealth. "The federal tax codes are shifting," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the paperwork. "To shield the family trust from incoming capital gains penalties, we need to execute a routine title transfer. It is a standard bureaucratic shuffle, moving the primary estate deed into a shielded holding status." Brenda already reviewed the primary pages. "We just need your signature on the secondary trustee line to finalize the authorization." He slid a heavy silver pen across the table. It stopped inches from my hands. Next, he pushed the thick document stack forward. The top page featured a bright yellow adhesive flag indicating the required signature line. I did not reach for the pen. I pulled the documents closer, keeping my facial expression carefully blank. I ignored the signature page and flipped to the dense, single-spaced paragraphs buried deep within the center of the packet. White-collar criminals rely on the fatigue of their victims. They bury the poison in the middle of the contract, assuming the target will skim the headers and sign the final page out of sheer boredom. My eyes tracked the legal jargon, translating the dense terminology with effortless precision. It was not a title transfer. It was a retroactive indemnity clause. The text explicitly stated that the trust administrators hereby acknowledge, ratify, and authorize all prior encumbrances, liens, and commercial collateral agreements attached to the property. The brilliance of the trap was sickening. If I signed that page, I legally authorized the $1.5 million mortgage Mike secretly placed on the house. The forged signature would morph into a sanctioned action. He would effectively launder his own felony, erasing the wire fraud and securing his escape route. He needed the secondary trustee to validate the crime. I looked up from the paper. Mike was watching me, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked near his ear. The faint scent of nervous perspiration drifted across the table. "I cannot sign this, Mike," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, steady cadence. The ambient noise in the dining room vanished. Naya lowered her coffee cup, her serene expression fracturing into a scowl. "What do you mean you cannot sign it?" she snapped. "It is a basic administrative update. Stop being so difficult." "It is an indemnity clause," I replied, looking directly at my mother. "It ratifies unverified encumbrances on the estate. Signing this removes the structural protections my father built into the trust. It exposes the house to commercial liability. I will not authorize it." Brenda slammed her palms flat against the mahogany surface. The impact rattled the fine china teacups. "You are doing this on purpose," she shouted, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "Mike spends weeks negotiating with high-level attorneys to protect our future, and you walk in here looking for an excuse to sabotage his work. You cannot stand the fact that he is successful," Brenda continued, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You sit in your dreary little cubicle judging a visionary because your own life is empty. You are a jealous, ungrateful daughter. I should have removed you from the trust years ago." I let her scream. The tragic irony of the moment washed over me. The woman hurling insults across the table was one signature away from authorizing her own ruin. She defended the man actively stealing her sanctuary while attacking the only person preventing the theft. I did not raise my voice to match hers. I did not attempt to explain the impending foreclosure. Logic bounces off the armor of a narcissist protecting their chosen narrative. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I left the unsigned document resting near the silver pen. "If you want to dissolve the trust protections, you will have to find a judge willing to override the secondary trustee," I stated, keeping my tone cool and detached. "Good luck with the tax codes, Mike." I turned and walked out of the dining room. I navigated the familiar hallway, stepping out the front door into the crisp afternoon air. Behind me, the foundation of Mike's charade cracked open. Without my signature, the retroactive indemnity failed. The forged collateral remained an active federal offense. The East Coast Holding Company still possessed the lethal paperwork. The walls were rapidly closing. The cash flow from his empty dirt lot had evaporated. The Nevada mother was demanding her monthly stipend. And now his attempt to launder the real estate fraud had died on the dining room table. With the trap closing and his financial avenues severed, the incoming pressure required a new, desperate narrative. How will Mike explain his frozen bank accounts to a family that expects limitless luxury? The implosion of a white-collar criminal rarely occurs overnight. It manifests as a slow, suffocating restriction of oxygen. Following my refusal to sign the retroactive indemnity clause, Mike found himself entirely cut off from fresh capital. His primary operating accounts hit zero. The East Coast Holding Company, my anonymous LLC, initiated the aggressive penalty phases of the commercial default. He possessed no cash to placate his defrauded local investors. More importantly, he possessed no liquidity to satisfy the demanding shadow ledger in Nevada. When a grifter runs out of money, they invariably pivot to their greatest remaining asset: narrative control. Mike needed a plausible explanation for his sudden inability to fund the opulent lifestyle Naya and Brenda expected. He deployed a classic diversionary tactic widely utilized by cornered fraudsters: the bureaucratic red herring. During a Thursday evening dinner at a high-end Boise steakhouse, Mike manufactured a crisis. He stared down at his untouched filet mignon, rubbing his temples with an expression of profound exhaustion. He claimed his corporate accountants discovered a severe clerical error originating from a rogue third-party vendor. The Internal Revenue Service, he explained, initiated a standard compliance audit. He told Naya and Brenda the federal government temporarily froze his primary corporate accounts, pending a routine review. The lie was brilliantly engineered to exploit their biases. Brenda despised government regulation, viewing taxation as an unfair penalty levied against visionary entrepreneurs. Naya thrived on the drama of victimization. They instantly rallied around him. They framed Mike as an innocent martyr, persecuted by a slow, incompetent bureaucracy. Naya posted vague, inspirational quotes on her social media platforms about supporting your spouse through temporary trials. They swallowed the narrative whole, entirely oblivious to the reality that the federal government was not freezing his accounts. The accounts were simply empty. The red herring bought him time on the domestic front, but it failed miserably across state lines. The Nevada mother did not care about fabricated IRS audits. Rachel operated on a strict biological timeline. She had a 3-year-old son to feed, clothe, and shelter. When the $6,500 transfer failed to clear on the first of the month, she demanded answers. When Mike offered excuses, she lost patience. 2 months before the baby shower, my professional smartphone chimed with a subtle notification. I sat in my home office analyzing a routine corporate risk assessment for the bank. I glanced at the screen. A new message request waited in my LinkedIn inbox. The sender possessed a generic profile lacking a profile picture or employment history. I opened the message. Jasmine, you do not know me, but I know exactly who you are. We share a mutual problem named Mike. I need to meet you. Today. The message concluded with a phone number bearing a Southern Nevada area code. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The isolated worlds Mike meticulously constructed were finally beginning to bleed into one another. I dialed the number, utilizing a secure VoIP application to mask my location. Rachel answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded thin, strained, tight with an exhaustion I instantly recognized as the unique fatigue of a single mother fighting a losing battle. We arranged a meeting at an independent coffee shop situated on the outer perimeter of the Boise city limits, a location far removed from the upscale cafes Naya frequented. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner booth that offered a clear sightline to the entrance while shielding my profile from the main seating area. I ordered a black coffee and waited. Precisely at noon, a woman walked through the glass doors. She looked nothing like the polished, heavily curated women who populated my sister's social circle. Rachel wore practical jeans, a faded sweater, and carried an oversized canvas tote bag. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. She scanned the room, spotted me, and slid into the booth across the table. She did not offer pleasantries. She reached into her canvas tote and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope, placing it squarely between our coffee cups. "He missed the payment," Rachel stated, her voice lacking any dramatic inflection. It was the sound of a woman stating a grim mathematical fact. "He told me his accounts were frozen by the IRS. He told me he just needed a few more weeks to finalize the extraction." I frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What extraction?" Rachel let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "You think he loves your sister. You think he married her because he wanted a life in Idaho. He married her because your mother possesses a 7-figure trust fund, and he needed a deep well to tap. He promised me he was leaving Naya the moment he secured the final distribution from the estate. We were supposed to move to Florida. He told me the Boise marriage was just a long-term corporate acquisition." The plot twist landed with the devastating force of a physical strike. Mike was not simply a man caught between two lives attempting to juggle a secret child while maintaining a legitimate marriage. He was actively scamming both women simultaneously. He weaponized Naya's vanity and Brenda's greed to fund a planned escape route, intending to drain their accounts dry before vanishing across state lines to reunite with his original family. "But he lied to me, too," Rachel continued, tapping the manila envelope. "He told me the monthly stipends were clean money, drawn from legitimate real estate profits. I started receiving strange letters from the bank questioning the transaction codes. I hired a private accountant to look at the routing history. Do you know what he has been doing for the past 36 months? I looked at the envelope. I traced the money. I replied quietly, I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know he swindled local investors to pay you. Rachel shook her head, her eyes flashing with a sharp, fearful intensity. It is worse than a Ponzi scheme, Jasmine. Look at the papers. I broke the metal clasp and slid a stack of printed spreadsheets onto the table. The documents were unredacted bank statements detailing 3 years of transaction history. I applied my professional AML training to the columns, tracing the origin codes. My breath hitched. Mike was not just writing checks from his business account. He was routing the stolen investor capital through complex offshore mirror accounts, washing the funds through international servers before depositing the clean money into Rachel's Nevada LLC. He was actively, deliberately structuring the transactions to evade federal banking triggers. The localized fraud utilizing a forged signature on a dirt lot was a localized crime. Routing stolen capital through offshore servers to hide the origin of the funds elevated the operation into the highest tier of federal money laundering. He used my name, Rachel whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched her coffee cup. He made me the registered agent. He routed the stolen money through my account. If the feds figure this out, they will not just arrest him, they will arrest me. They will put me in federal prison, and my son will go into the foster system. I cannot let that happen. You are the only person who sees through him. You work in compliance. You have to help me burn him before he pulls me down with him. I looked at the woman sitting across from me. She was a victim of his charm, caught in a terrifying legal trap engineered by a sociopath. She provided the final, devastating piece of ammunition required to lock the execution. I gathered the bank statements, sliding them back into the manila envelope. I placed the envelope into my briefcase, locking the brass latches. I will handle it, Rachel, I promised, my voice steady and resolute. Do not contact him again. Do not ask for the money. Go back to Nevada and wait. I stood up, leaving my untouched coffee on the table. I walked out to my sedan, the heavy weight of the briefcase serving as a physical anchor. The raw data locked inside that envelope transformed a domestic dispute into a federal mandate. The forensic audit was complete. The trap was fully armed, loaded with forged real estate deeds, offshore, money laundering logs, and the birth certificate of an abandoned child. The sheer destructive power of the evidence required a meticulous delivery system. Dropping the binders on a kitchen table during a Sunday dinner lacked the necessary gravity. I required a public stage, an arena where the golden child and the fraudulent tycoon could not gaslight the audience or control the narrative. I needed a setting where their curated illusion collided violently with undeniable reality. Jasmine has everything she needs. How will she set the perfect stage for the execution? The execution of a flawless financial trap demands absolute patience. You cannot rush the final sequence. You must allow the targets to construct their own gallows, ensuring every knot is tied by their own hands. 1 week before the country club disaster, the final mechanism presented itself in my mailbox. I stood in the foyer of my modest apartment, sorting through the daily mail. Sandwiched between a utility bill and a credit card offer sat a thick, heavy envelope. The paper was premium grade, a thick, textured vellum that practically hummed with unearned arrogance. I slid my thumb under the flap and extracted the contents. The baby shower invitation featured elaborate gold foil lettering and an intricate floral border. It demanded my presence at an exclusive resort in Sun Valley, Idaho, a location synonymous with billionaire retreats and elite winter ski lodges. I scanned the lower corner of the card. A specific line of text printed in a delicate cursive font caught my eye. High-value registry attached. Please respect the aesthetic of the event. The sheer audacity of the demand triggered a cold, cynical smile. The dramatic irony layered beneath that gold foil was suffocating. I walked into my home office and logged into my secure AML terminal, checking the real-time financial metrics tied to my Delaware holding company. I brought up the collateral tracking data linked to Mike's defaulted commercial note. The data confirmed a staggering, horrifying reality. Naya was not funding a $100,000 Sun Valley extravaganza with Mike's phantom real estate profits. Mike possessed zero liquidity. The money flowing to the resort, caterers, the florists, and the boutique planners originated from a high-interest home equity line of credit. Brenda recently opened the HELOC, drawing massive sums of cash directly against the equity of her pristine Boise estate to finance the celebration. She was bankrupting her future to throw a lavish party for the golden child. But the true tragedy lay hidden in the fine print of property law. Brenda believed she possessed total equity in her home. She remained blissfully unaware that Mike forged her signature secretly, cross-collateralizing the property to secure his initial commercial loan. She did not know that the commercial note was in terminal default. She did not realize the East Coast holding company actively managing the foreclosure was solely owned by the daughter she despised. Brenda was effectively borrowing money against a house she no longer owned to fund a party celebrating a man who was actively laundering stolen capital to a secret family. The house of cards was not just trembling, it was actively on fire, and they were busy arranging the floral centerpieces. I spent the next 4 days meticulously preparing the legal guillotine. I did not engage in screaming matches or petty text exchanges. I operated strictly within the sterile, unforgiving boundaries of institutional finance. I scheduled a discreet meeting with the specialized attorney representing my anonymous LLC. We met in a sterile, glass-walled conference room downtown. "We need to finalize the eviction protocols," I instructed, sliding a manila folder across the table. "The grace periods are exhausted. The secondary indemnity failed. The collateral is officially forfeit." My attorney reviewed the paperwork, checking the timestamps on the default notices Mike ignored for months. "The documentation is bulletproof, Jasmine," he confirmed, tapping a pen against the legal pad. "The forged signature creates a massive criminal liability for the primary borrower, but it does not invalidate your claim to the collateral as the purchaser of the distressed debt." "When do you want to initiate the physical seizure?" I checked my calendar, aligning the dates. The Sun Valley baby shower was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon. It provided the ultimate stage for the exposure, but the financial consequences required a separate, distinct delivery. "File the paperwork with the county clerk on Friday afternoon," I directed, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. "Coordinate with the sheriff department. I want the physical eviction notices served and posted on the front doors of the Boise estate exactly at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The day immediately following the shower. Let them enjoy the party before the reality hits." The timeline locked into place. The structural integrity of the trap was absolute. I left the attorney's office, returning home to complete the final phase of the preparation. I booted up my encrypted terminal and printed the forensic evidence. I generated 3 massive binders, organizing the documents with surgical precision. Binder 1 contained the offshore money laundering logs, the bank statements Rachel provided, and the corresponding IP addresses, proving Mike routed stolen investor capital through international servers. Binder 2 held the unredacted real estate files, the commercial default notices, and the high-resolution scans of the forged signature Mike utilized to secretly pledge Brenda's home as collateral. Binder 3, the most devastating compilation, contained the Nevada birth certificate, the paternity documents, and the photographic evidence of the secret 3-year-old son. I slid the heavy binders into a sturdy leather briefcase, locking the brass clasps. The physical weight of the evidence served as a grounding reminder of the impending destruction. I walked into my bedroom and packed a simple, tailored navy suit. I did not require a custom $5,000 gown to command a room. I required leverage, and my briefcase held enough explosive data to level a small city. I arranged childcare for Leo, coordinating with a trusted friend to ensure he remained safely insulated in Boise during the weekend. However, Leo, possessing an incredibly sharp intuition, sensed the shifting atmospheric pressure in our home. As I packed my overnight bag, he stood in the doorway, watching me with quiet, intense, dark eyes. "Are you going to see Uncle Mike?" Leo asked, his voice steady. "Yes, buddy," I replied, zipping the bag closed. "I have to attend Aunt Naya's party." Leo did not smile. He crossed his arms over his chest, a posture mirroring my own defensive stance. "You do not like him," he stated, not as a question, but as a confirmed fact. I knelt down, ensuring we maintained eye contact. "Sometimes adults make very bad choices, Leo. It is my job to make sure those choices do not hurt our family. I will be back on Monday, okay? He nodded, accepting the vague explanation, filing the interaction away in his sharp, observant mind. I kissed his forehead, grabbed my briefcase, and walked out to my sedan. The drive from Boise to Sun Valley takes nearly 3 hours, winding through steep mountain passes and dense pine forests. I navigated the twisting roads, the steady hum of the engine, providing a stark contrast to the chaotic violence I was about to unleash. I was driving straight into the epicenter of their curated delusion. They expected a submissive single mother, a convenient target for their passive-aggressive insults. They expected the scapegoat. I was walking into the lion's den, but I was the one carrying the matches. As the luxury resort loomed into view nestled against the snow-capped peaks, a critical variable remained unresolved. The corporate shield protecting my identity was strong, but Mike was a desperate, cornered animal. Desperate animals occasionally possess an erratic, dangerous intuition. Will Mike figure out Jasmine as the LLC owner before the party begins? My drive to the mountains encountered an unforeseen detour, barely 15 miles outside the Boise city limits. My phone chimed through the dashboard speakers. The trusted friend I secured to watch Leo called with a sudden medical emergency involving her own mother. The logistics of single parenthood offer zero margin for error. Lacking alternative options, I turned the sedan around, drove back to my apartment, and retrieved my son along with his tailored miniature suit from the closet. I strapped him into the back seat, ensuring his seatbelt clicked tight. I handed him a sketchbook and a small set of pencils, instructing him to remain invisible at the event. I did not want him exposed to the toxic theater, but fate apparently required his presence in the room. We resumed the journey, driving into the heart of the Idaho mountains. The Sun Valley Resort materialized against a backdrop of snow-dusted peaks resembling a fortress constructed of imported timber and sheer glass. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open doors for arriving guests. I gripped the handle of my leather briefcase, steering Leo through the towering mahogany entrance. The ballroom was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Over 150 members of the state elite mingled beneath cascading crystal chandeliers. Waitstaff circulated carrying silver trays of caviar and imported champagne. A string quartet played a delicate classical arrangement, masking the hum of wealthy networking. I guided Leo toward a small, isolated table, situated near the service corridor, far removed from the epicenter of the celebration. I positioned my briefcase beneath my chair, resting my heels against the rigid leather. From this vantage point, I observed the curated fiction unfolding across the room. Naya held court near a towering ice sculpture carved into the shape of a swan. She beamed, posing for a hired photographer while accepting lavish gifts from the wives of prominent local politicians. Her attire demanded attention. Naya wore a custom maternity gown spun from imported blush silk, featuring intricate, hand-stitched lacework along the bodice. As a group of banking executives approached to offer congratulations, her voice rose, carrying easily over the ambient noise. She boasted about the designer flying the garment in from a boutique atelier, citing the price tag with rehearsed, casual arrogance. $5,000. My mind automatically processed the figure, cross-referencing the number against the forensic ledgers locked inside my briefcase. The math aligned with a sickening poetic symmetry. According to the decrypted spreadsheets, Mike was short exactly $5,000 on his required Ponzi interest payments for the current fiscal week. The liquidity he desperately needed to pacify his angry local investors was literally draped across his wife's shoulders. She was parading around a room full of marks, wearing stolen funds woven into silk. The irony tasted like ash. While Naya basked in the unearned admiration, the architect of the illusion stood near the mahogany bar. Mike projected the exterior shell of a successful tycoon, but the underlying foundation was visibly cracking. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to his frame, yet dark patches of perspiration stained the fabric beneath his arms. He did not engage in the celebratory toasts. He gripped a crystal tumbler of scotch, his knuckles stark white. He was trapped in a digital nightmare, Every 10 seconds, he pulled his smartphone from his pocket, staring at the illuminated screen with a raw, feral panic. The default deadline mandated by my anonymous holding company expired the previous midnight. He knew the East Coast lawyers possessed the legal authority to freeze his remaining shell accounts at any moment. He was a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to pull. He scanned the crowd, his eyes darting frantically across the room, until his gaze landed on my isolated table. He set his glass down so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. He marched across the ballroom, navigating through the laughing guests with rigid, erratic strides. I told Leo to stay seated and finish his appetizer. I stood up, intercepting Mike near a secluded corridor leading toward the guest restrooms, shielding my son from the impending interaction. The polished charm Mike utilized to manipulate my mother was entirely gone. He looked feral. His breathing came in shallow, rapid bursts, and the scent of stale liquor radiated from his skin. "I need a favor, Jasmine," he rasped, skipping any preliminary greetings. He cornered me against the textured wallpaper, leaning in close to prevent passing guests from overhearing. "A short-term loan, $50,000. I know you have cash parked in those index funds." I maintained a flat, neutral expression, refusing to break eye contact. "Why would a visionary developer require a sudden loan from a bank investigator?" I asked, my tone dropping into a cool, clinical register. He flinched, swiping a hand across his damp forehead. "A vendor dispute," he lied, the fabrication sounding weak and hollow. "An architectural firm froze a project account over a billing error. I just need a bridge to clear the hold. I will pay you back with a 20% yield by next Friday. I swear on my life." I looked at the man sweating in the corridor. This was the same individual who stood in my driveway 18 months prior, threatening to weaponize the family court system to strip my child away from me. This was the fraudster who forged my mother's signature, binding her paid-off sanctuary to an empty dirt lot. This was the father who routed stolen capital across state lines to silence a secret family, leaving his other child fatherless in the Nevada desert. He destroyed everything he touched to feed his own insatiable greed, and now he stood before me, begging for a lifeline. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the sheer desperation of his position settle into the space between us. I offered him a cold, empty smile, a smile devoid of any empathy or concession. "I do not have the funds, Mike," I stated, my voice smooth and definitive. His face contorted a vicious, ugly rage breaking through the veneer of panic. "You lying, bitter reject," he hissed, a fleck of spittle flying from his lips. "You want to see us fail. You want Naya to suffer, because nobody wants you. You are a pathetic excuse for a sister." I did not flinch. I did not rise to the bait. Insults from a drowning man hold zero currency. "If you excuse me," I replied, stepping around his rigid frame, "I need to check on my son." Mike cursed under his breath, a harsh, guttural sound echoing in the empty corridor. He turned and stormed back toward the main ballroom, disappearing into the crowd of oblivious, wealthy marks. He returned to his customized prison, forced to smile and shake hands, while the digital executioner prepared the final stroke. I walked back to my table, taking my seat beside Leo. My son watched the room with quiet, observant eyes, sensing the unnatural atmospheric pressure building beneath the crystal chandeliers. I reached down, resting my hand on the leather handle of my briefcase. The brass clasps felt cool to the touch. The physical evidence waited patiently in the dark. At the front of the room, a hired event coordinator stepped onto the raised stage. She tapped a silver spoon against a microphone stand, a sharp, piercing ping that cut through the ambient chatter. The string quartet stopped playing. The waitstaff retreated to the edges of the ballroom, aligning themselves along the walls. The guests began to take their seats, their attention shifting toward the head table, decorated with cascading white orchids. The formal portion of the afternoon was commencing. Naya glided toward the center of the room, taking the microphone from the coordinator. She stood beneath the bright spotlights, preparing to deliver a speech designed to cement her status and humiliate her chosen targets. The stage was set. The audience was captive. The timeline converged into a single, inescapable moment. The tension is at its peak. Who will strike the first blow? The air in the ballroom felt thin, artificially cooled by the resort ventilation system, yet suffocatingly dense with expectation. 150 members of the Idaho elite settled into their plush chairs, their attention anchored to the raised platform at the front of the room. Naya gripped the microphone, her knuckles stark white against the dark metal. She adjusted her posture, ensuring the custom silk fabric of her $5,000 gown draped flawlessly across her 5-month bump for the hired photographers. The timeline rapidly converged, snapping back to the precise, agonizing moment where the entire narrative began. Naya did not offer a traditional speech expressing gratitude for the lavish gifts or the presence of her influential friends. She utilized the public forum to execute a calculated psychological strike designed to permanently elevate her status by diminishing mine. Her gaze swept across the sea of faces, bypassing the state senators and real estate moguls, locking onto the isolated table near the service corridor. She looked directly at me. A cruel, curated smirk curled the edges of her lips. She raised the microphone, the amplified audio projecting her voice, with a crisp, resonant clarity that reached every corner of the vast space. Raising a child is such a profound responsibility, Naya declared, her tone dripping with a manufactured, patronizing sympathy. It requires stability. It requires a solid foundation. And while some people in our own family struggle to provide that basic structure, I am just so incredibly grateful for my husband. She paused, turning her head slightly, to ensure the camera lens captured her profile. She delivered the final crushing blow without breaking eye contact. At least my baby will have a father. The ballroom reacted exactly as she orchestrated. The wealthy guests, a demographic accustomed to rewarding confidence and mocking vulnerability, offered a polite, unified wave of laughter. They raised their crystal glasses, chuckling at the expense of the single mother wearing a generic navy suit sitting on the periphery. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceilings, a wealthy endorsement of her cruelty. Brenda, seated at the head table directly adjacent to the stage, leaned forward, her face flushed with maternal pride over her golden daughter. She amplified the insult, her voice carrying easily through the residual laughter. "Some women just make bad choices," Brenda announced, patting Naya's shoulder. I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. My hands remained resting quietly in my lap, the leather handle of my briefcase pressed firmly against my right calf. I processed the public humiliation with the cold, analytical detachment of a compliance officer reviewing a corrupted ledger. I understood the mechanics of the trap I laid. I knew the physical evidence locked inside my briefcase held the power to vaporize their entire existence. I was simply waiting for the applause to fade before initiating the controlled demolition. The execution, however, arrived slightly ahead of schedule, triggered by a variable I failed to account for. Sitting beside me, Leo stopped eating his catered appetizer. He placed his small silver fork carefully on the edge of the porcelain plate. My 8-year-old son possessed a quiet, observant nature, but he also harbored a fierce, unwavering loyalty to the woman who raised him alone. He absorbed the mocking laughter. He witnessed the blatant disrespect directed at his mother. His internal compass governing right and wrong snapped to a rigid bearing. He remembered the blue glow of my tablet screen in the middle of the night. He remembered the photograph of the man standing by the orchids, holding a toddler who looked strikingly familiar. The Chekhov's gun loaded months prior in my dark home office, fired with devastating precision. Leo did not ask for permission. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping sharply against the hardwood floor, cutting through the fading applause. He stepped onto the seat, elevating his small frame above the surrounding tables. He stood straight, smoothing the front of his miniature striped tie. He looked directly at the head table, locking his dark, serious eyes onto the woman holding the microphone. "Aunt Naya," Leo asked, his young voice, carrying an unnatural, piercing clarity that sliced through the ambient noise of the massive room. "Should I tell everyone about Uncle Mike's other family?" The resulting silence possessed a physical, terrifying weight. It did not merely settle over the ballroom. It slammed into the space, instantly vacuuming the oxygen from the air. The polite laughter died in the throats of the banking executives. The waitstaff froze their silver trays, hovering motionless over the tables. The hired sound technician, stationed in the rear booth, sensing a catastrophic shift in the atmosphere, abruptly killed the background music track. The total absence of sound was deafening. On the raised platform, Naya's curated facade disintegrated. The smug superiority vanished, replaced by a blank, uncomprehending shock. Her fingers went slack. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. The delicate glass hit the wooden floorboards, shattering with a loud, explosive crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Cider pooled around her expensive shoes, staining the hem of her silk gown. Brenda gasped, lunging across the white tablecloth, knocking over a floral centerpiece in a frantic, uncoordinated attempt to silence the boy standing across the room. Her chair tipped backward, crashing to the floor, but she could not reach him. The words were already suspended in the air, irreversible and damning. I shifted my gaze to the mastermind standing near the bar. Mike's reaction confirmed the lethal accuracy of the strike. The swaggering tycoon who spent 2 years mocking my career and draining my mother's retirement accounts ceased to exist. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw hung open, attempting to form words, but his vocal cords failed. He staggered backward, his shoulder hitting a decorative pillar. He looked like a man watching a tidal wave crest over his head. He pointed a trembling finger toward my table, his voice finally cracking through the silence in a hoarse, desperate rasp. "She put him up to this," Mike screamed, the panic stripping away his curated accent, exposing a raw, feral terror. "Jasmine is lying. She is poisoning her kid's mind because she is jealous of us. Do not listen to her." The guests turned their heads, staring at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. They expected me to shrink back to grab my son and flee the room in tears. They expected the submissive scapegoat to crumble under the accusation. I did not run. I turned to Leo, placing a gentle, steady hand on his small shoulder. "You did exactly the right thing, buddy," I whispered, ensuring only he could hear the validation. "Thank you for being so brave. Now sit down and let me handle the grown-ups." Leo nodded, stepping down from the chair, returning to his seat with quiet dignity. I reached down, unlatching the brass clasps on my briefcase. The metal snapped open with a sharp, definitive click. I extracted the 3 massive forensic binders holding the heavy volumes against my chest. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored navy jacket. I did not rush. I walked toward the center of the ballroom, navigating the narrow pathway between the silent tables. I felt the collective gaze of 150 influential strangers tracking my every movement. I bypassed the panicked real estate mogul. I bypassed the weeping mother attempting to right her fallen chair. I walked directly onto the polished hardwood of the main dance floor, stopping exactly 10 feet away from the woman in the custom maternity gown. I was no longer the invisible sister-in-law. I was the executioner, and I carried the receipts. The secret is out, but how much damage will Jasmine's briefcase actually do? The acoustic properties of a grand ballroom are designed to amplify the slightest whisper. When a room holding 150 people falls into absolute stunned silence, the quiet becomes a physical pressure. I stood on the polished hardwood floor holding the weight of 3 forensic binders. I did not require a microphone to command the space. I possessed the undeniable authority of verifiable data. I did not shout. Shouting implies emotional instability. Shouting invites an argument. I channeled the cold, actuarial precision I utilized every day to dismantle corporate shell companies. I looked at the woman standing on the raised platform, her silk maternity gown stained with spilled cider, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the podium. It is not a child's imagination. Naya, I projected my voice, carrying the crisp, steady cadence of an auditor delivering a terminal assessment. I stepped forward, placing the first thick binder onto the edge of the head table. I let it drop from a height of several inches. The heavy volume hit the linen tablecloth with a loud, resounding thud that echoed sharply off the crystal chandeliers. Mike has a 3-year-old son living in a townhouse in Henderson, Nevada. I announced the words, cutting through the dense air like a scalpel. I have the certified birth certificate in this folder. The paternity documents are verified. I also have the bank logs proving your husband has been paying court-ordered hush money for 36 consecutive months. He possessed an established, breathing second family long before he ever stood at an altar in Idaho and recited vows to you. Naya's face turned chalk white. The blood drained from her features so rapidly she appeared physically ill. She swayed on her feet, her manicured hands clutching her stomach. She looked frantically toward the bar, seeking a denial, searching for the polished charm her husband always deployed to navigate out of tight corners. Mike offered nothing. He stood paralyzed, leaning heavily against a decorative pillar, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The swaggering tycoon who spent 2 years dominating family dinners and mocking my career was reduced to a hyperventilating shell. He stared at the blue binder resting on the table, recognizing the specific color coding of institutional financial reports. He knew the data contained within those pages was unassailable. A low, shocked murmur rippled through the front rows of the audience. The wives of the banking executives who spent the afternoon praising Naya's flawless marriage leaned closer to one another, exchanging horrified, bewildered glances. The curated illusion of the golden child's perfect dynasty fractured, splintering into 1,000 irreparable pieces under the harsh light of reality. Naya opened her mouth, attempting to formulate a defense, attempting to protect the social standing she valued above oxygen. He told me he was paying a consultant. She stammered, her voice thin and reedy, cracking under the pressure of the exposure. He said the Nevada transfers were for an architectural retainer. I did not offer sympathy. I did not soften the blow. Narcissism requires a brutal, uncompromising dismantling. But infidelity is the least of your problems, Naya. I continued, my tone dropping into a darker, more dangerous register. I reached down, lifting the second massive binder, placing it firmly beside the first. Mike has not been funding those hush money payments with legitimate business revenue, I stated, locking my gaze onto the panicked man standing by the pillar. The luxury condominium project he boasts about at the country club is an empty dirt lot. It lacks municipal zoning approval. It lacks structural engineering permits. It generates zero income. The low murmur in the audience escalated, shifting rapidly from shocked gossip into genuine, aggressive alarm. Several men wearing expensive tailored suits, the prominent local real estate developers and political lobbyists who populated the guest list, sat up straight in their chairs. Their posture shifted from relaxed observers into rigid, highly alert targets. He has been operating a localized Ponzi scheme, I announced, elevating my voice to ensure the developers heard every single syllable. He utilizes the incoming capital from new private investors to pay the overdue interest yields of older, angry backers. He used the phantom returns to maintain his lifestyle and to fund the secret Nevada family. I tapped the cover of the second binder. I have 3 years of unredacted bank statements provided directly by the Nevada mother. I have the wire routing logs. I outline the mechanics of the crime, displaying the raw data to the entire room. He is not just bouncing checks. He is actively routing stolen investor capital through complex offshore mirror accounts, washing the funds through international servers to evade federal banking triggers before depositing the clean money into a domestic shell LLC. A tall, silver-haired man seated near the front row, a prominent commercial investor who frequently partnered with local development firms, stood up. His face flushed a dark, dangerous red. He pointed a heavy finger directly at Mike. "Is she telling the truth?" Mike the investor demanded, his voice booming with fury. "Did you route the bridge loan I gave you last month through an offshore server?" Mike shrank back, his eyes darting frantically toward the mahogany exit doors. "I can explain," he rasped, his hands raised in a pathetic defensive gesture. It is a temporary liquidity hold. The accounting firm made an administrative error. I can clear the ledgers by Friday." "No, you cannot," I interrupted, terminating the lie before it could gain traction. "Because your primary operating accounts hold a balance of exactly 0. You are entirely illiquid." The ballroom descended into controlled chaos. The facade of the wealthy tycoon evaporated entirely, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of a cornered felon exposed to his victims. The investors in the room, realizing they had been swindled by the charming man drinking their scotch, pulled out their smartphones. They dialed their personal attorneys, their wealth managers, their fixers, scrambling to assess the financial damage and freeze whatever assets remained. Naya collapsed into her plush chair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with violent, ragged sobs. But she was not crying over the betrayal of her marriage or the existence of a secret sibling for her unborn child. She wept because the opulent lifestyle, the designer gowns, the country club luncheons, the unearned superiority she wielded like a weapon, was permanently extinguished. She realized the $5,000 dress she wore was purchased with stolen money. She was the wife of a disgraced, bankrupt criminal. I watched the devastation unfold, absorbing the chaotic energy swirling through the room. I felt a profound, cold satisfaction. I executed the exposure flawlessly, stripping away their power and returning the humiliation they inflicted upon me 1,000 times over. The mathematical ledger balancing Mike's fraudulent existence was complete. However, the controlled demolition required one final strike. The destruction of the golden child's marriage and the exposure of the federal wire fraud satisfied the professional parameters of the investigation. But the deepest, most painful betrayal originated closer to home. The woman who enabled the monster, the mother who willingly sacrificed her own daughter's security to fund a mirage, sat frozen at the head table. Mike is ruined, but what is the devastating final secret Jasmine holds for her mother? The implosion of the ballroom reached a fever pitch. Angry investors shouted across the tables, demanding restitution, while Naya continued to sob into her hands, mourning the death of her social currency. The atmosphere crackled with the electric energy of sudden, catastrophic ruin. But amidst the noise and the panic, one figure refused to surrender the illusion. Brenda stood up from her overturned chair. She smoothed the front of her expensive tailored dress, a desperate automatic reflex to restore order to a situation spiraling wildly out of her control. She possessed a formidable ability to reject reality when it conflicted with her curated narrative. She built her entire identity upon the belief that she was the brilliant matriarch of an ascending dynasty. She could not process the fact that she had financed a criminal. "You are lying, Jasmine," Brenda shrieked, her voice cutting through the chaotic din. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate denial. "You fabricated these documents. You hacked into his accounts just to humiliate your sister." Mike is a brilliant developer. He is building an empire for this family, and you are just a bitter, jealous woman trying to tear him down because you have nothing. The crowd quieted slightly, turning their attention from the panicked investors back to the family drama unfolding at the head table. They watched the mother fiercely defend the man who just defrauded half the room, while attacking the daughter holding the proof. The toxic dynamic that governed my entire existence was laid bare under the bright crystal chandeliers for everyone to witness. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical pitch. I turned, slowly shifting my body to face her directly. I looked into the eyes of the woman who demanded I forfeit my son's life insurance trust, who disinherited me without a second thought, who routinely mocked my independence to elevate the golden child. I felt no anger. I felt no lingering desire for her approval. The emotional cord was completely severed. I looked at her with the dead, cold gaze of an executioner examining the final target. "He built a grave, Mom," I stated, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal resonance, "and he threw you in it." I reached down into the leather briefcase. My fingers closed around the thickest, heaviest binder in the collection. I lifted it out and dropped it onto the table beside the others. The impact was definitive, a final, heavy period placed at the end of a long, tragic sentence. I rested my hand flat against the dark cover. To secure the original $1.5 million commercial loan for his empty dirt lot, Mike required a substantial physical asset to satisfy the bank underwriters. I explained, ensuring the silent crowd heard the mechanics of his ultimate betrayal. A barren field lacks sufficient collateral value. He needed a heavyweight anchor to secure the capital. Brenda frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. The absolute certainty in her eyes began to waver, replaced by a creeping, terrifying uncertainty. He leveraged the future revenue of the condominium sales, she stammered, repeating the lie Mike fed her for 2 years. He showed me the projections. He showed you a forged spreadsheet I corrected swiftly. Banks do not lend 7 figures based on fictional future revenue. They require hard, tangible property. And Mike did not own any property. I flipped open the heavy binder, navigating directly to the specific page marked by a red adhesive flag. I turned the binder around, sliding it across the smooth linen tablecloth until it stopped directly in front of her. "He used your house," I announced, the words hanging heavy in the cool air. "He secretly cross-collateralized your pristine, paid-off Boise estate." Brenda stared down at the digital scan of the commercial loan application. Her eyes tracked the dense legal paragraphs resting on the page, outlining the specific municipal coordinates and the custom renovations of the sanctuary she prized above all else. She saw her home explicitly listed as the primary guarantor asset, binding the property to the massive commercial debt. "I never agreed to this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands hovered over the binder, trembling violently. "I never signed this paper." "I know," I replied, my tone clinical and detached. "Because he forged your signature. He practiced your cursive loops until he perfected the angle and pressure. He committed felony real estate fraud, binding your home to his toxic debt while you slept down the hall." Brenda staggered backward, her high heels catching on the edge of the carpet. She clutched her chest, her breathing growing shallow and erratic. The invincible matriarch, the woman who treated love as a transactional currency, realized she traded her sanctuary to fund a sociopath. But the devastation was not yet complete. A forged signature constitutes a severe criminal liability, but it does not halt the machinery of institutional finance. He defaulted on the commercial note 10 months ago. I continued maintaining the relentless pressure of the audit. The empty lot generated zero income. The hush money drained his reserves. He possessed no liquidity to satisfy the arrears. The regional bank, acting on strict regulatory protocols, initiated foreclosure proceedings. To clear their ledgers, they bundled his toxic debt and auctioned it on the open secondary market for pennies on the dollar. Brenda looked up from the binder, her eyes wide and terrified. She searched my face desperately, seeking a loophole, seeking an escape route she could exploit. "The bank owns my house," she choked out, a single tear spilling over her lower lash line. "I can fix this. I can hire an attorney to contest the forgery. I can sue the bank." "You cannot sue the bank, Mom," I stated, delivering the final lethal blow. "Because the bank no longer holds the note." I paused, allowing the silence to stretch, letting the sheer magnitude of the impending revelation settle over the room. I looked at Naya weeping in her chair. I looked at Mike cowering near the pillar. I looked at the mother who traded my future for an illusion. "I bought the distressed debt," I announced, my voice ringing clearly off the vaulted ceilings. "I utilized an anonymous Delaware holding company to purchase the defaulted commercial note from the auction docket. I am your mortgage holder. I literally own the ground you walk on." Brenda gasped the sound, a harsh, ragged intake of air. The color vanished entirely from her face, leaving her complexion a sickly, mottled gray. She swayed on her feet, her hands reaching out blindly to grip the edge of the head table for support. "And because you believed his lies, I continued the dramatic irony of the situation, sharpening into a razor edge. You executed a catastrophic financial error. You maxed out a high-interest home equity line of credit to fund this $100,000 baby shower. You threw a lavish party to celebrate a criminal using equity from a house you no longer own. The absolute silence in the ballroom returned heavier and more suffocating than before. The wealthy guests, the politicians, and the banking executives watched the matriarch of the Garcia family realize her entire existence was a hollow, indebted shell. They witnessed a woman bankrupt herself to fund a party on property legally controlled by the daughter she discarded. The grace periods are exhausted, I explained, closing the heavy binder with a definitive snap. The secondary indemnities failed. The collateral is officially forfeit. My East Coast attorneys filed the final paperwork with the county clerk on Friday afternoon. The local sheriff is serving the physical eviction notices and posting them on your custom oak front doors tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Brenda collapsed. Her legs gave out, and she dropped heavily into the chair beside Naya. She did not scream. She did not hurl insults or accuse me of jealousy. She let out a deep, guttural, animalistic sob that tore through the quiet room. She buried her face in her hands, mourning the loss of the physical legacy she valued more than her own children. The vanity she prized above all else had cost her the roof over her head. The custom stonework, the manicured lawns, the country club status, all of it evaporated in a single catastrophic instant. I stood on the dance floor surrounded by the wreckage of their curated delusion. The ledger was perfectly balanced. I exposed the Nevada family I dismantled, the localized Ponzi scheme, and I executed the foreclosure, securing my son's stolen inheritance. The forensic audit was complete. The truth is exposed, but will Mike face justice or manage to escape? The disintegration of a white-collar criminal follows a predictable physiological sequence. The initial shock gives way to frantic denial, which rapidly degrades into sheer, unadulterated panic. When the final layer of deception is stripped away, leaving the fraudster exposed to the harsh light of undeniable proof, the survival instinct takes absolute control. The curated charm, the tailored suits, the arrogant posture all evaporate instantly. The instinct demands one immediate action: flight. I watched the sequence unfold with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. Standing by the decorative pillar, Mike processed the totality of his ruin. He looked at the heavy forensic binders resting on the table. He looked at Naya weeping uncontrollably in her ruined silk gown. He looked at Brenda collapsed in her chair, mourning the loss of her estate. He realized the invisible sister-in-law did not simply expose his secrets. She engineered a trap with no discernible exit. The Nevada family, the Ponzi scheme, the forged real estate collateral, it was all public record, now broadcast to 150 of the most influential individuals in the state. The wealthy investors who previously clapped their hands and drank his scotch were now staring at him with a cold, predatory fury. They were dialing their respective attorneys, initiating the aggressive legal maneuvers required to freeze his remaining shell accounts and seize whatever assets he possessed. The realization hit him with physical force. He was bankrupt. He was homeless. And if he remained in the ballroom for another 5 minutes, he would be surrounded by a mob demanding their stolen capital. Mike did not attempt to comfort his pregnant wife. He did not attempt to apologize to his shattered mother-in-law. He turned his back on the wreckage he created and bolted. He moved with a frantic, uncoordinated speed, shoving a stray catering cart out of his path. Crystal glassware shattered against the hardwood floor as the cart tipped over, but he did not pause. He sprinted toward the heavy mahogany exit doors situated at the rear of the grand ballroom. His trajectory was obvious. He intended to navigate the service corridors, reach the resort parking lot, and start the engine of his least luxury vehicle. He calculated he possessed a narrow window of opportunity to flee the state, cross the border into Nevada, and access the offshore mirror accounts before the authorities caught wind of the exposure. He hit the heavy double doors, shoving his shoulder against the brass push bars. The doors swung open violently, rebounding against the exterior walls. He stepped out into the grand foyer, expecting an empty corridor leading toward freedom. He slammed into a solid wall of dark blue tactical fabric. The exit route was entirely blocked. Standing shoulder to shoulder in the wide doorway were 3 federal agents representing the Securities and Exchange Commission. They wore crisp, dark windbreakers displaying the stark yellow letters of their agency, identifying them as the Elite Financial Crimes Division, tasked with dismantling interstate money laundering operations. Positioned flanking the federal agents were 2 uniformed officers from the local Sun Valley Police Department, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. The arrival of law enforcement was not a spontaneous coincidence triggered by a sudden anonymous phone call. The mechanics of a federal raid require meticulous coordination and undeniable probable cause. The execution was scheduled 48 hours prior. When I finalized the eviction protocols with my East Coast attorney, I also authorized a secondary, separate delivery. My legal counsel transmitted digital copies of the unredacted forensic binders directly to the federal prosecutor's office. The package included the offshore routing logs, the bank statements provided by Rachel, and the IP addresses proving Mike deliberately structured the transfers to evade IRS detection limits. The data provided the exact mathematical architecture of the money laundering ring, establishing the probable cause required to secure an immediate federal arrest warrant. The agents did not require an invitation to the baby shower. They simply tracked the location of their primary target, waiting patiently in the foyer for the inevitable implosion to drive him directly into their hands. Mike staggered backward, the sudden impact knocking the breath from his lungs. The feral panic in his eyes amplified. He looked wildly over his shoulder, scanning the ballroom for a secondary exit. A service door, a kitchen access route, anything that offered an escape from the incoming handcuffs. He found nothing but a sea of angry investors and shocked guests watching his final, desperate performance. Michael Cooper, the lead federal agent, stated, his voice projecting a calm, authoritative cadence that carried easily into the silent ballroom. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, securities violations, and interstate money laundering. Place your hands behind your back." Mike did not comply immediately. He raised his hands in a pathetic, trembling gesture, attempting to deploy the polished charm that served him for 2 years. "There is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice a weak, hollow rasp. "A clerical error. My accountants can explain the routing discrepancies. I just need to make a phone call to my corporate office." The agent did not engage in negotiations. He stepped forward, gripping Mike's shoulder with professional, forceful precision, spinning the disgraced developer around. The sharp, metallic, ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs echoed through the open doorway. The polished tycoon was officially restrained, his arms pulled awkwardly behind his back. The facade was permanently extinguished. The sudden, brutal reality of the arrest shattered the final, lingering remnants of denial clinging to the head table. Naya witnessed her golden husband, the man she utilized as a prop to elevate her social standing, transformed into a handcuffed felon. She let out a piercing, guttural scream, clutching her stomach with both hands. She wailed, swaying violently in her chair, demanding comfort, demanding the attention of the crowd she spent the afternoon insulting. But the social dynamic of the room had fundamentally altered. The guests, a demographic that worships success and ruthlessly punishes failure, offered zero sympathy. No one rushed forward to offer a comforting embrace. No one produced a tissue or whispered soothing platitudes. The wives of the banking executives physically turned their backs, retreating toward the opposite corners of the room, treating the golden child like a highly contagious disease. The prominent developers and politicians remained focused on their smartphones, actively directing their legal teams to salvage their stolen capital. Naya was entirely isolated, drowning in the wreckage of her own arrogance, while surrounded by 150 strangers. Brenda remained collapsed in her chair, entirely unresponsive to her daughter's screams. She stared blankly at the heavy forensic binders resting on the table, mourning the loss of the custom stonework and the manicured lawns she would never see again. The vanity she prioritized above the emotional well-being of her family had literally cost her the roof over her head. She was a matriarch presiding over a kingdom of ashes. The federal agents flanked the handcuffed prisoner, escorting him firmly through the grand foyer toward the awaiting transport vehicles. The local police officers remained near the entrance, securing the scene, ensuring the angry investors did not attempt physical retaliation against the departing felon. I stood on the polished hardwood of the dance floor, observing the chaotic, imploding environment. The mathematical ledger was perfectly balanced. The Nevada family was exposed, the localized Ponzi scheme was dismantled, the fraudulent real estate collateral was seized, and the architect of the betrayal was currently sitting in the back of a federal vehicle. The operation was a complete, flawless success. I reached down, closing the heavy brass latches on my empty leather briefcase. The physical weight of the evidence was gone, transferred to the authorities and the public record. I felt a profound, quiet lightness settle into my chest. The toxic dynamic that governed my existence for 32 years was permanently severed. I did not require an apology. I did not require their acknowledgement or their remorse. I extracted the poison, closed the wound, and secured the perimeter. I walked back to the isolated table near the service corridor. Leo sat quietly in his chair, his dark, observant eyes tracking my approach. He recognized the shifting atmospheric pressure, understanding that a massive, unseen storm had just broken and passed. I knelt beside him, ensuring we maintained eye contact. "Are we leaving, Mom?" he asked, his young voice steady and calm. "Yes, buddy," I replied, offering a genuine, warm smile. "The grown-ups are finished here. It is time to go home." I stood up, taking his small hand in mine. We turned our backs on the screaming golden child, the shattered matriarch, and the panicked investors scrambling to salvage their portfolios. We navigated the narrow pathway between the tables, walking out the service exit. We stepped through the heavy glass doors, exiting the suffocating artificial atmosphere of the luxury resort into the crisp, clear mountain air. The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the snow-dusted peaks, illuminating the path forward. When the dust settles, what does the new reality look like for the Garcia family? 2 years have passed since the shattered champagne flute hit the floorboards of the Sun Valley Resort. I sit on the cedar deck of my home in Boise, watching the autumn wind strip the yellow leaves from the oak trees. Leo is 10 years old now, kicking a soccer ball across the fenced grass. The crisp afternoon air smells of dry earth and approaching winter. The environment is defined by an unbroken, profound peace. The chaotic noise of my former family is a distant, faded echo. The transition from the dramatic climax in the ballroom to the stark reality of the present day occurred with the ruthless, mechanical efficiency of a balanced equation. The math settled perfectly. When you expose a white-collar criminal hiding behind a facade of unearned arrogance, the legal system does not care about curated social media profiles or country club memberships. The federal prosecutors utilized the forensic binders I provided as a blueprint to dismantle the remaining architecture of the fraud. Mike faced the consequences of his arrogance in a sterile federal courtroom. He traded his bespoke tailored suits for a standard-issue jumpsuit. He attempted to deploy his trademark charm on the jury, spinning a convoluted narrative about administrative errors and rogue accountants. The prosecutors simply presented the offshore routing logs, the forged real estate deeds, and the bank statements detailing the hush money routed to Nevada. Forensic accounting leaves zero room for reasonable doubt. He was convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and interstate money laundering. The judge handed down a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The swaggering real estate tycoon is now just a registered inmate number, confined to a cell, dictating a routine where he possesses zero power and zero influence. The fallout for the women who enabled him arrived on a much faster timeline. The morning immediately following the baby shower, while Brenda and Naya were still reeling from the exposure, the legal machinery of my Delaware holding company executed its final mandate. Promptly at 9 o'clock, the county sheriff drove up the sweeping driveway of the pristine Boise estate. There were no dramatic courtroom battles or miraculous last-minute financial rescues. When a property is tethered to a defaulted commercial note via a forged cross-collateralization, the seizure process is swift and unforgiving. The sheriff taped the official eviction notices directly to the custom oak front doors. Brenda was forced to pack her prized antique furniture and her designer wardrobe into cardboard boxes under the watchful eyes of her wealthy neighbors. The descent from high society was brutal. Brenda and Naya were stripped of their wealth, their status, and the unearned superiority they wielded like a weapon. They currently share a cramped two-bedroom rental apartment situated on the industrial side of the city. The lemon polish and expensive vanilla candles are gone, replaced by the scent of cheap carpet cleaner and the noise of shared walls. Brenda spends her days navigating a strict, fixed budget she never anticipated, entirely exiled from the charity boards and luncheon circles she spent 4 decades cultivating. Society abhors a scandal, and her former friends severed all contact the moment the federal indictments hit the local news. Naya experienced a total erasure of her curated identity. You cannot project the image of a thriving dynasty when your backdrop is a generic linoleum kitchen. Her influencer facade disintegrated overnight. The comment sections on her social platforms transformed into a digital graveyard filled with the angry remarks of defrauded investors and mocking observers. She permanently deleted her profiles, retreating into a bitter, isolated existence. She is raising her child in the long shadow of a convicted felon trapped in a tiny apartment with a mother who constantly reminds her of the empire they lost. They feed off each other's misery, bound together by the wreckage of their own vanity. The resolution of the Boise estate delivered a pristine layer of poetic justice. My holding company took formal possession of the deed. I did not keep the house. The physical structure harbored too many toxic memories, too many echoes of conditional love and endless criticism. I listed the 3 acres on the commercial real estate market. Within 2 months, a regional developer purchased the tract. The corporation brought in heavy machinery, leveling the custom house, clearing the manicured landscaping, and bulldozing the stone pathways. They paved over the legacy Brenda prized above her own daughters, breaking ground on a high-density suburban subdivision. I took the profit from the sale, routing the transaction through my corporate attorney. I paid the required capital gains taxes, satisfying the institutional protocols. The remaining capital, an amount reaching into the low 7 figures, was diverted away from my personal accounts. I established an irrevocable, shielded trust, designating Leo as the sole exclusive beneficiary. The legal framework of the trust ensures the funds remain locked and protected, immune to any frivolous civil lawsuits Brenda might attempt to file in her desperation. The generational wealth my mother tried to steal to fund a fraudster ultimately bypassed her golden child entirely. The equity she prized secured my son's future, guaranteeing his college tuition and his foundational independence. The money returned to the bloodline, but it landed in the hands of the boy who possessed the courage to stand on a chair and speak the truth. Through the inevitable grapevine of extended relatives and former acquaintances, I hear the narratives my family spins to cope with their ruin. They call me a villain. They tell anyone willing to listen that I orchestrated a cruel, unprovoked attack out of deep-seated sibling jealousy. They frame themselves as the innocent victims of a predatory corporate scheme executed by a bitter, estranged daughter. I let them spin their fictions. I do not send text messages correcting the record. I do not engage in defensive phone calls. I learned a vital lesson sitting at that cramped table near the service doors. You cannot use logic to extract someone from a position they did not use logic to enter. They require a villain to justify their poverty and their isolation. I am perfectly content playing the role of the monster in their fictional universe. Their opinions hold zero currency in my daily reality. I do not require their approval to validate my worth. I extracted the poison, closed the ledger, and walked away. I look at Leo chasing his soccer ball, the afternoon sun catching the bright fabric of his jacket. He is growing into a thoughtful, intelligent young man, unburdened by the expectations of a toxic hierarchy. We survived the storm because we refused to pretend the rain was not falling. We faced the ugly truth of our environment and chose to protect our peace over preserving their comfortable illusions. If you are listening to this and you recognize your own reflection in my story, I want you to internalize a crucial concept. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. You do not owe your financial security, your mental health, or your peace of mind to individuals who treat your boundaries as mere suggestions. They mistake silence for weakness. They assume a lack of argument equates to submission. They fail to realize that silence is also the sound a predator makes before it strikes. When they build their castles on your boundaries, you do not argue. You let them construct their elaborate theater productions. You let them dig their own graves with their vanity and their greed. You quietly audit their lives, locate the structural weaknesses, and you charge rent. My name is Jasmine Cooper. Thank you for listening to my story on the Elena Vengeance channel. Keep your ledgers balanced, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one. When the heavy yellow machinery finally rolled onto the 3-acre lot in Boise, tearing down the custom stonework and uprooting the manicured oak trees, it erased more than just a physical residence. It demolished a monument to conditional affection. It is tempting to look at the wreckage of the Cooper family and view the story solely as a masterclass in calculated retribution. The narrative delivers a satisfying arc of defaulted loans, offshore wire fraud, and a stolen microphone. However, beneath the surface of the shattered crystal flutes and the served eviction notices lies a much deeper, far more resonant tragedy. It is a cautionary tale about the architecture of the American household, the invisible ledgers we force our children to carry, and the devastating consequences of prioritizing optics over substance. Within our culture, we are frequently consumed by the concept of generational success. We place immense value on the tangible markers of upward mobility. We prize the sprawling suburban estates, the prestigious zip codes, the designer maternity gowns, and the flawless holiday greeting cards. We are taught that our primary duty as parents is to build a fortress of material comfort, handing the next generation a life easier than the one we inherited. Yet in the frantic pursuit of that specific aesthetic, we sometimes lose sight of the foundational virtues required to sustain it. The most enduring inheritance a parent can leave behind is not a trust fund or a deed to a piece of property. It is a deeply rooted sense of honesty, fairness, and emotional resilience. Brenda's true failure did not occur on the day she signed a forged real estate document. Her ruin began decades earlier around her own dining room table, when she decided to assign distinct, rigid roles to her daughters. She engineered an ecosystem where maternal approval functioned as a transactional currency, doled out only when the family vanity was sufficiently fed. By shielding Naya from accountability and celebrating her superficial milestones, Brenda crippled her favorite child. When parents tip the scales of fairness, they do not merely elevate one sibling, they actively dismantle the familial bond. Brenda taught Naya that her worth was tethered exclusively to her appearance and her social proximity to wealth. She handed her an illusion of invincibility, leaving the young woman entirely unequipped to navigate the brutal, unforgiving realities of adulthood. When a predator arrived, offering the shiny exterior of a real estate tycoon, they were easy prey. They prioritized the aesthetic of a successful family over the hard, unglamorous work of enforcing basic boundaries. Conversely, the treatment of Jasmine highlights a profound deficit of emotional awareness. A traditional family structure should operate as a sanctuary of equitable support. Instead, Brenda viewed her eldest daughter's reliability not as a virtue to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited. When a mother drains her own retirement to fund a fraudster, while simultaneously demanding her independent daughter surrender her child's safety net, the psychological damage runs deep. It sends a devastating message. Your peace and your labor only hold value if they can be harvested to sustain the favored child's comfort. In modern American society, the pressure to conform to a specific domestic ideal can feel suffocating. Single parents frequently bear the brunt of this judgment, navigating a landscape that often equates a solo endeavor with inherent instability. Naya weaponized the concept of the traditional two-parent home to attack Jasmine's single motherhood, entirely blind to the fact that a home built on deception is infinitely more fractured than a home built by one honest parent. Genuine parental responsibility is not shielding your offspring from the consequences of their poor choices. It is not secretly co-signing commercial loans to fund a hollow lifestyle. Nor is it weaponizing guilt to extort savings from the child who actually practices financial discipline. True guidance requires the moral courage to let your children stumble. It demands the emotional intelligence to look a struggling, arrogant son-in-law in the eye and decline a request, allowing the natural friction of life to teach the lessons that money cannot buy. By enabling the deception, the matriarch became the architect of her own ruin. She confused enabling with loving. Consider the catalyst of the entire exposure. The trap was sprung not by a seasoned investigator, but by an 8-year-old boy. Leo possessed a fierce internal compass because he was raised in an environment that valued truth over appearances. He observed the cruelty directed at his mother, processed the hypocrisy, and chose to speak. That is the ultimate triumph of Jasmine's parenting. She broke the toxic cycle. She cultivated a child who recognized injustice and possessed the courage to stand on a chair and confront it in a room full of powerful adults. That kind of moral clarity is the true legacy. It outlasts any bank account and withstands any social scandal. Navigating the complex dynamics of modern family life requires a fierce commitment to emotional honesty. If you have ever found yourself holding the weight of uneven expectations, or if you have had to rewrite your own legacy after walking away from a toxic environment, you are not alone. There is profound power in realizing you do not have to carry a burden that was never yours to bear. We invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the Elena Vengeance channel. Here we explore the intricate, often painful realities of human relationships, celebrating the quiet strength it takes to draw a line in the sand and reclaim your narrative. Drop a comment below and share your journey, because your voice matters and your experiences resonate with thousands of others walking the same path. As we look back at the quiet cedar deck in Boise and the paved-over earth where a mansion once stood, a lingering question remains. The heavy machinery cleared away the timber and leveled the custom home, erasing the physical remnants of a fractured dynasty. But the echoes of the choices made within those walls do not vanish so easily. Perhaps the disgraced matriarch sits in her cramped apartment, staring at the peeling paint, finally understanding the true cost of her conditional love. Or perhaps, as is often the case with those who build monuments to their own vanity, she remains trapped in her own fiction, forever wondering why the daughter she undervalued chose to let the castle fall. We are left to reflect on the soil we are tending in our own homes. Are we planting seeds of authentic connection and quiet integrity? Or are we meticulously watering an illusion, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering just over the horizon?